The night Emily Hartman became a billionaire's wife, she learned she had not been chosen for love, but signed into a revenge plan before the champagne had even gone flat. The wedding reception had ended less than 20 minutes earlier, yet the private suite above the Grand Meridian Hotel in Manhattan already felt colder than the ballroom below. Downstairs, white roses still covered the tables. A string quartet still played soft music for guests pretending this marriage was a fairy tale, and society photographers were probably sending out the first images of Adrian Blackwell and his new bride beneath a canopy of crystal lights. Upstairs, the fairy tale had been folded shut and replaced with a document on black leather. Emily stood near the window in her wedding gown. The train pooled around her feet like spilled moonlight. She was 27, white, soft-faced. With light brown hair pinned beneath a veil she had not yet removed and hazel eyes still carrying the shine of a ceremony she had tried to believe in. In one hand, she held her bouquet. In the other, she held the edge of the desk because something in Adrian's face told her the real vows had not been spoken at the altar. Adrian Blackwell stood across from her in a black tuxedo, 36 years old, white, impossibly composed, the billionaire chief executive officer of Blackwell Holdings and the most controlled man Emily had ever met. His silver cuff links caught the light when he opened the folder. He did not look like a husband. He looked like a judge preparing to read a sentence. "Before we leave for the estate," he said, "there is one final signature." Emily looked from the folder to his face. "We already signed the marriage license." "This is not that." His voice was calm enough to hurt. He turned the document toward her. "Contract marriage agreement. 12 months. Public appearances required. Separate bedrooms. No claim to emotional partnership. Financial settlement upon completion. Hospital endowment clause. Hartman asset access clause." Emily read the words slowly, each line stripping warmth from the room. Downstairs, guests believed she had married into power. Here, in the silence above them, she realized she had entered a room where love had never been invited. "Adrian," she whispered. "What is this?" He rested one hand on the edge of the desk. "The truth. The truth was supposed to come before the wedding." His eyes moved, almost imperceptibly, but his voice did not soften. "Your father built his life on things taken from mine. This marriage gives me what Richard Hartman stole from the Blackwell family." Emily felt the bouquet tilt in her hand. A white rose slipped loose and fell against the carpet. "My father. Do not pretend you do not know the kind of man who raised you." The words struck harder because they were quiet. Emily thought of Richard Hartman walking her down the aisle with his hand firm on her arm, smiling for cameras, whispering that she was finally doing something useful for the family. She thought of the debts he never explained, the locked office, the calls that ended when she entered, the hospital wing he had promised to fund and then abandoned when no one rich enough was watching. She knew her father was not innocent, but she had not known she was being used to punish him. "You married me to reach him," she said. Adrian did not deny it. "The Hartman family trust opens certain voting rights through a marital transfer clause. Your father thought he could use this wedding to stabilize his reputation. He did not read carefully enough." Emily looked at the contract again, and the room blurred for one breath. A 12-month performance. A wife on paper. A key in a lock. She should have thrown the pen at the desk. She should have walked out in her wedding gown, past the reporters, past the guests, past every person who thought wealth made cruelty more elegant. Instead, her eyes found one clause near the middle of the page. St. Mary's Children's Wing shall receive immediate emergency funding in the amount of $2 million upon execution of this agreement, with additional support held in escrow for pediatric care, family housing assistance, and staff retention. Her fingers tightened. St. Mary's. The children's wing where she had volunteered after her mother died. The place with faded murals of clouds on the ceiling, plastic. Dinosaurs in the waiting room, nurses who knew every child's favorite blanket, and parents who slept upright in chairs because going home felt like giving up. Her father had promised the money at a charity breakfast, then quietly pulled it when his company needed cash. Emily had spent weeks calling donors, writing letters, begging former board contacts to keep the wing open. No one had offered enough. Adrian had, but not for love, for leverage. She lifted her eyes. "You put the hospital in the contract." "Yes." "Why?" "Because Celeste said you would need a reason to sign." Celeste Monroe, Adrian's attorney, the woman in the dark green dress who had watched the wedding from the second row with a smile as precise as a blade. Emily suddenly understood the glances, the careful schedule, the way the prenuptial documents had been rushed under the excuse of protecting both families. She looked back at Adrian. "So you bought my yes. I secured cooperation." "No," she said, and her voice finally steadied. "You found the one thing I could not walk away from and placed it under a trapdoor." His expression tightened. For a moment, something almost human moved behind his eyes, but he buried it before it could become mercy. "Sign, and the hospital receives funding tonight. Refuse, and the offer expires." Emily stared at him. The man she had married 2 hours ago stood close enough to touch and farther away than any stranger. She had thought his reserve was grief or pressure, or the loneliness that came with carrying a name like Blackwell. Now she saw the architecture beneath it. Revenge had not made him loud. It had made him exact. She set the bouquet on the desk, carefully, as if the flowers deserved more tenderness than the moment. Then she picked up the pen. Adrian watched her, expecting defeat, maybe fear, maybe the final proof that every Hartman could be cornered by money. Emily looked at the hospital clause again. She saw the children's wing lit at night, a little boy with a red blanket asking whether the fish painted on the wall were real, a nurse laughing with tired eyes, a mother crying silently over a bill she could not pay. Emily signed her name, not because Adrian owned her, not because Richard deserved protection, not because the Blackwell fortune dazzled her. She signed because somewhere across the city, children would keep their beds, nurses would keep their jobs, and families would not be punished for the sins of men in suits. When she placed the pen down, Adrian reached for the contract. Emily kept her hand on the page. "I signed for them," she said. "Not for you." His jaw flexed. "Do not mistake this arrangement for sentiment. Do not mistake my kindness for surrender." The room went silent. For the first time that night, Adrian Blackwell looked at his bride as if the signature he had demanded had opened a door he had not meant to enter. Then his phone buzzed on the desk. A message from Celeste lit the screen. First step complete. Richard will be vulnerable by morning. Emily saw it. Adrian saw that she saw it. And as the music from the ballroom floated faintly through the floor beneath them, Emily understood that her marriage had begun as a weapon, but Adrian did not yet know that weapons could break in the hands of the person holding them. 1 month before Emily Hartman signed her name beneath a hospital clause and became the wife of a man who saw her family name as a wound, Adrian Blackwell stood alone in the private archive room of Blackwell Tower, staring at the last photograph ever taken of his father as a powerful man. The room was 30 floors above Park Avenue, sealed behind tinted glass and a biometric lock, but it felt less like an office and more like a mausoleum built from contracts. Shelves of old merger files lined the walls. Framed newspaper headlines hung beneath soft lights. Blackwell Industries expands. Hartman Alliance promises historic growth. Then, 6 months later, Blackwell family loses controlling stake after failed merger. Adrian had memorized every headline before he turned 16. He knew the sequence the way some men knew prayers. First came the handshake between his father, Thomas Blackwell, and Richard Hartman. Then came the private side agreement Richard denied signing. Then came the sudden shift in voting rights, the missing amendment, the boardroom silence, and the morning Thomas Blackwell walked out of his own company with a face that looked older by 20 years. Adrian had been 17 then, standing beside the black town car outside the old Blackwell building, watching his father look up at a logo that still carried their name but no longer obeyed their blood. Thomas had not shouted. He had not cursed. That was the part Adrian remembered most. His father had simply adjusted his cuff, looked at his son and said, "Never let a man steal from you twice by making you too angry to think." Adrian had obeyed the thinking part. He had failed the anger part. Now, at 36, he controlled Blackwell Holdings, a rebuilt empire sharper and larger than anything his father lost. He owned towers, hotels, shipping contracts, private equity stakes, and enough influence to turn a whispered rumor into a boardroom earthquake. But revenge was different from success. Success filled the skyline. Revenge demanded a name. Hartman. Adrian reached for the old photograph. His father stood beside Richard Hartman in front of a conference table, both men smiling like history had not already chosen its traitor. Richard looked confident, handsome, charming, the kind of man who could shake your hand while calculating the exit. Adrian touched the edge of the frame and felt the familiar cold gather beneath his ribs. A knock sounded at the door. Celeste Monroe entered without waiting long enough for permission. She was 42, precise, elegant, and loyal in the way some lawyers were loyal to strategy more than people. Her dark green suit looked severe beneath the archive lights. In one hand, she carried a slim folder. In the other, a tablet glowing with Hartman family trust documents. "You should not spend so much time in this room," she said. Adrian did not turn. "You should not tell me what to do in my building. I tell you what is useful. You decide whether pride makes you deaf." That was Celeste. No softness wasted. No sentence without a hook. She placed the folder on the long table. "Richard Hartman is weaker than he looks." Adrian finally faced her. "I know. No. You know he is in debt. You know his public assets are strained. You know his creditors are circling. But you do not know this." She tapped the tablet, opening a trust diagram with lines, names, and clauses. The Hartman Family Trust has a marital access provision written decades ago for inheritance planning. If Emily Hartman marries into a qualifying financial entity with secured interfamily obligations, certain voting rights can be transferred or challenged through spousal partnership channels. Adrian stared at the screen. Emily, his daughter, 27, former hospital volunteer, publicly harmless, privately useful. Something in Adrian's face hardened. "Do not call her useful." Celeste's eyebrow lifted. "Interesting. You have never met her. That does not change the word." "Fine. Necessary." Adrian looked back at the trust diagram. He had seen Emily only in photographs. Standing at charity breakfasts in modest dresses, carrying boxes at hospital fundraisers, smiling beside children at St. Mary's Children's Wing. Not the usual Hartman spectacle. No yacht spreads. No society scandals. No interviews about legacy. That had irritated him more than it should have. He wanted every Hartman to look like Richard. It made revenge cleaner. "Why would she agree?" he asked. Celeste opened the folder. "Because Richard has cut funding to St. Mary's Children's Wing. The hospital is days from reducing pediatric family support and staff hours. Emily has been trying to replace the money quietly. She has failed." Adrian's eyes moved across the documents. Letters from hospital administrators, donation requests, a rejected grant appeal, Emily's signature at the bottom of several desperate proposals. Her handwriting was careful, almost gentle. "You researched her." "I researched leverage." Adrian looked up sharply. Celeste did not flinch. "Do not pretend moral discomfort now. You asked me to find the cleanest path to Hartman control. This is it. Marriage is not clean. No, it is efficient." The word settled between them like ice. Adrian walked to the window. Outside, Manhattan moved under a gray sky. Taxis sliding down wet streets. People crossing intersections with umbrellas tilted into the wind. Somewhere in that city, Emily Hartman was probably trying to save a hospital wing with phone calls and hope while her father buried debts behind locked doors. Adrian told himself that did not matter. Hartman blood was Hartman blood. The daughter had lived under the roof built by Richard's betrayal. She had carried the name that ruined his father. If the trust required her signature to open the final gate, then the signature would be obtained. "She will think it is a financial arrangement," Celeste said. "A marriage that protects her family from public collapse and secures the hospital. Richard will think he is gaining access to your stability. By the time he realizes the structure gives you leverage over the trust, it will be too late." Adrian kept his eyes on the city. "And Emily? Receives funding for her hospital, a settlement after 12 months, and the social advantage of having been Mrs. Blackwell. She will survive." "Survive," Adrian repeated. The word tasted worse than he expected. Celeste stepped closer. Adrian, your father did not survive Richard Hartman's betrayal with his legacy intact. Do not become sentimental because the daughter looks kind in photographs. He turned then, and the coldness in his face returned fully. This is not sentiment. Good. She slid a pen across the table. Then authorized the proposal. Adrian looked one last time at his father's photograph. Thomas Blackwell had warned him not to let anger make him stupid. Adrian had spent years convincing himself this plan was not anger. It was restoration. It was justice. It was the correction of a stolen history. He signed the authorization. Celeste gathered the papers with quiet satisfaction. I will approach Richard first. He will pressure Emily if necessary. Adrian's jaw tightened. No public threats. No scandal before the wedding. Of course, we need the bride willing. After she left, Adrian remained in the archive room until the lights dimmed automatically around him. On the table, one document had slipped from the folder. A copy of Emily's letter to St. Mary's. In it, she had written, "Children should not lose care because adults broke promises." Adrian read the sentence twice. For reasons he refused to examine, he folded the page and placed it in his inside jacket pocket instead of throwing it away. Then his phone lit up with a message from Celeste. Richard Hartman is ready to discuss terms. Adrian closed his eyes for 1 second, hearing his father's voice from years ago, warning him not to become too angry to think. But revenge had a way of sounding like thought when Payne wrote the plan, and by morning, Emily Hartman would be offered a marriage designed long before she ever walked down the aisle. Emily Hartman learned about the hospital first, not from her father, not from the board, not from any official letter, but from a nurse who tried to smile while packing half a shelf of donated toys into a cardboard box. St. Mary's Children's Wing sat on the east side of Manhattan, wedged between taller buildings that looked too expensive to notice it. The lobby smelled faintly of hand sanitizer, paper coffee cups, and crayons. Murals of clouds and hot air balloons covered the pediatric hallway, though the paint had faded where small hands touched the walls over the years. Emily had been coming there since her mother died, first because grief needed somewhere useful to go, then because the children began knowing her name. She read picture books in waiting rooms, organized donated pajamas, sat with parents while nurses explained complicated bills, and learned which vending machine took quarters without stealing them. It was the only place in New York where being a Hartman did not feel like carrying someone else's shadow. That morning, she found Nurse Angela in the playroom, folding dinosaur stickers into a plastic bin with red eyes and a steady mouth. "Tell me the truth," Emily said. Angela looked toward the hallway, then lowered her voice. "The family support program is being reduced. Staff hours too. Maybe more if replacement funding does not arrive." Emily felt the floor tilt slightly. "My father promised the annual gift." Angela's face answered before her words did. The check was withdrawn. Emily closed her eyes. She had known Richard Hartman was in trouble. She had heard the late-night calls, seen the unpaid invoices stacked beneath his leather planner, watched him become louder. At breakfast when silence would have revealed too much. But she had not thought he would take from St. Mary's. Not this. Not children waiting for treatment while parents counted gas money and rent in the same breath. "How long?" she asked. 2 weeks before they start changes. 2 weeks. Emily left the playroom with the sound of a little girl asking for a purple marker following her down the hall. Outside, rain glazed the sidewalk, and the city moved fast around her. Bright umbrellas passing like no one had just told her a small world was about to lose its light. She called every donor she knew. She emailed old charity contacts. She wrote proposals until midnight at the Hartman townhouse kitchen table, while her father hosted a private meeting upstairs and pretended not to hear the printer running. By the third day, every answer had the same shape. Admiration, regret, limited capacity, future consideration. Kindness, she learned, often arrived with no money attached. On the fourth night, Richard entered the kitchen in a navy suit, smelling of expensive whiskey and panic hidden under cologne. "You look tired," he said, as if concern were a tie he could put on when needed. Emily did not look up from her laptop. "St. Mary's needs the money you promised." His jaw tightened. "The timing changed. Children do not stop needing care because your timing changed. Do not speak to me as if you understand the pressure this family is under." Emily finally looked at him. "I understand that you made a promise in front of cameras and broke it when no one important was watching." For a moment, Richard's face hardened into something almost ugly, then smoothed again. "You want to help them?" "Yes. Then you may have the opportunity." The next afternoon, a black car collected Emily from the townhouse and brought her to Blackwell Tower. No one had explained why. Richard only said she should wear something respectable and remember that family survival sometimes required sacrifice. She arrived in a gray dress and the bracelet her mother had left her. A thin gold band with a tiny white stone that caught light only when she moved. In the lobby, men and women in tailored suits walked past marble walls and security desks without looking lost. Emily felt every inch of her ordinary life inside that building, but she lifted her chin and followed the assistant to the top floor. Adrian Blackwell was waiting in a conference room with Celeste Monroe beside him and a view of Manhattan stretched behind them like proof of ownership. He rose when Emily entered. That surprised her. His face did not. Cold, controlled, handsome in the distant way of statues and men who had learned not to ask for comfort. "Miss Hartman," he said. "Mr. Blackwell." Her voice stayed calm because St. Mary's had taught her that panic did not help when children were listening. Celeste opened a folder. "Your father's financial situation is unstable. Public collapse would damage employees, creditors, and your family's remaining assets. Mr. Blackwell is prepared to offer a solution." Emily looked at Adrian, not Celeste. "A solution for whom?" Something moved in his eyes, brief and unreadable. "For everyone affected." That is rarely true when powerful people say it. Celeste's pen paused. Adrian studied her as if she had failed to behave like the desperate daughter he had expected. "The proposal is a marriage contract," he said. Emily went still. Rain tapped faintly against the glass far above the city. "A what?" "A 12-month public marriage. You receive a settlement, protection from immediate public scandal, and full funding for St. Mary's Children's Wing. Your father receives temporary stabilization. I receive access to certain Hartman Trust provisions. The words came clean and sharp, but Emily heard the silence behind them. He did not mention love because love was not in the room. He did not mention revenge because revenge had better manners when lawyers were present. She reached for the folder and turned pages until she found the hospital clause. $2 million released immediately. Additional support for staff retention. Family housing assistance. Pediatric care. Her throat tightened. Why St. Mary's? Celeste answered. It is a priority for you. Emily looked at Adrian. No, it is leverage. He did not deny it. She almost stood then, almost walked out with her pride, intact and nothing else saved. But in her mind, she saw the playroom shelf half empty. Angela folding stickers, parents sleeping in chairs, a boy with a red blanket asking whether she would come back next week. Pride was clean. Need was not. If I sign, Emily said slowly, the hospital receives funding before the wedding? Upon execution, Celeste replied. And staff hours are protected? Written into escrow conditions. No publicity using the children's names. Adrian's eyes sharpened, as if that was the first demand he had not expected. Agreed. No photos of me at the hospital as your grateful bride. Agreed. And employees at Hartman offices are protected from sudden layoffs during the transition. Celeste looked to Adrian. Adrian kept his eyes on Emily. Add it, he said. Celeste's expression flickered with irritation, but she wrote the note. Emily closed the folder. My father knows? Adrian's silence was enough. Of course Richard knew. Of course he had sent her here dressed respectfully to become an agreement he could survive. The betrayal hurt, but it did not surprise her. That was its own kind of grief. Emily picked up the pen, then stopped. I am not signing because I trust either of you. Adrian's face remained still. I did not ask you to. Good, because I am signing for people who will never sit in this room. She wrote her name, and the sound of the pen against paper felt louder than rain, louder than traffic, louder than every warning she ignored in her own heart. Adrian took the contract after her, adding his signature with the precision of a man completing a transaction. But when Emily stood to leave, she turned back once. One more thing, Mr. Blackwell. Yes. If you think marrying me gives you ownership of my conscience, you did not read carefully enough either. For the first time since she entered, Adrian did not have an answer. And as Emily stepped into the elevator with her mother's bracelet cold against her wrist, she did not know that the man who had just bought her name would spend the rest of that day staring at hers on the contract, wondering why victory felt less like justice than the beginning of a mistake. The Blackwell estate in Westchester looked less like a home than a verdict made of stone. Emily arrived there 3 nights after the wedding, just as rain began moving across the long driveway in silver lines, softening the dark lawns, the trimmed hedges, and the massive front doors that opened before she touched the handle. The house was beautiful in the way old money often was beautiful. Grand enough to impress strangers, quiet enough to make sadness echo. Marble floors stretched beneath high ceilings. Portraits of Blackwell men watched from paneled walls. A crystal chandelier hung above the foyer like frozen light. Every surface gleamed, every corner obeyed, and nothing felt warm enough to belong to a living person. Adrian stood beside her as the staff brought in her luggage. Not much of it. A few suitcases, 1 garment bag, a box of books, and the wooden keepsake box that held photographs of her mother, old volunteer badges from St. Mary's, and letters from children who spelled her name wrong but loved her anyway. Adrian looked at the box, then away. Mrs. Blackwell, said an older woman with silver hair and careful posture. I am Margaret Ellis, the house manager. Emily turned immediately. Please call me Emily, if that is comfortable for you. Margaret blinked, as if no one had considered her comfort in years. Of course. Adrian's expression shifted slightly, almost irritation, almost confusion. He stepped forward before the moment could grow too human. Margaret will show you to your room. Emily looked at him. My room? Yes. Separate bedrooms were in the agreement, he said, voice even. I read the agreement. She did not say it sharply. That made it worse. He looked toward the staircase. The east suite is yours. The west wing is mine. My office and archive room are private. Staff schedules are not to be changed without Margaret. Public appearances will be coordinated through Celeste. If you need anything, ask Margaret, not me. Emily held his gaze. And if I need my husband? The word husband landed between them like something breakable placed on stone. Adrian's jaw tightened. This arrangement does not require that. Emily nodded once, absorbing the rule, the distance, the deliberate cruelty of a marriage designed to have no marriage inside it. Then I will try not to inconvenience the arrangement. She turned to Margaret. Could you show me the kitchen first? Margaret looked startled. The kitchen? Yes. I would like to know where things are. Adrian's voice came from behind her. There is staff for that. Emily looked back. There are also people behind that word. Then she followed Margaret down the hall, leaving Adrian in the foyer beneath the chandelier, watching the woman he had brought into his house like a contract walk toward the servants' corridor as if it were the front door. The kitchen was large, bright, and busy with polished copper pots, stainless steel counters, and the soft rhythm of people trained to move around wealth without being noticed. Emily learned names before she learned cabinets. Margaret, house manager. Daniel, driver. Rosa, cook. Ben, groundskeeper. Claire, junior housekeeper with a son in 2nd grade. She repeated each one, asked how long they had worked there, thanked them for helping with the wedding weekend, and apologized in advance if she opened the wrong drawer. Rosa laughed, then looked guilty for laughing in a house where laughter seemed to require permission. Emily noticed. By the next morning, she had placed her books on the east suite shelves, but left most of the room untouched. The bed was enormous. The curtains were heavy. The fireplace had never held ash. The bathroom looked like a spa in a magazine. On the bedside table, someone had placed fresh white roses. Emily moved them to the sitting room because white roses now reminded her of a wedding reception that had turned into a contract negotiation. Instead, She put her mother's photograph near the lamp. Then she took off the thin gold bracelet her mother had left her and placed it beside the photo, touching it once before closing the box. Downstairs, Adrian ate breakfast alone at one end of a table long enough for 12 people and cold enough for none. Emily entered wearing a simple cream sweater and dark pants. He looked up from his tablet. "You do not have to join me. I know." She sat 3 chairs away, not beside him, not opposite him, choosing a distance that obeyed the contract without surrendering to it. Rosa brought coffee. Emily thanked her by name. Adrian noticed the faint softness that crossed Rosa's face. He also noticed Emily did not ask about his meetings, did not perform affection, did not pretend the marriage had warmth it had not earned. She simply buttered toast, read the hospital funding confirmation on her phone, and exhaled quietly when she saw St. Mary's had received the first transfer. That sound stayed with him all day. Relief. Real relief. Not greed. Not victory. Relief for people outside the room. Over the next week, Emily moved through Blackwell Estate like a candle someone had placed in a cold hallway. Not bright enough to change the architecture, but impossible not to see. She found Margaret coughing in the pantry and made her sit while she prepared tea with honey. She noticed Daniel rubbing his wrist after carrying luggage and arranged for the heavy grocery deliveries to be moved by 2 people instead of 1. She asked Claire's son's name and remembered he liked space books. She sent leftover wedding flowers to St. Mary's instead of letting them die in the storage room. None of it was dramatic. None of it benefited her. That was exactly what made Adrian distrust it. Kindness, to him, had always arrived holding a receipt. Richard Hartman smiled before betrayal. Celeste spoke of loyalty while sharpening strategy. Society praised charity when cameras were near, but Emily's kindness happened in hallways, kitchens, and quiet rooms where no one important was watching. One night, Adrian came home after 11, exhausted from meetings with trustees and legal teams, preparing the first move against Richard. The house was dim. He expected silence. Instead, he found a covered bowl of soup on the kitchen island, a folded napkin beside it, and a note in Emily's handwriting. "Rosa said you missed dinner. This is not emotional partnership. It is just soup." Adrian stared at the note longer than necessary. Then he warmed the soup himself because waking staff felt suddenly wrong. He ate standing at the counter, alone in the kitchen where Emily had learned everyone's names. The soup was simple, chicken and rice, not elegant, not expensive, not part of any plan he understood. That bothered him. The next morning, he found Emily in the small memorial room off the East Hall, the one place Margaret had been instructed not to show her. She stood before a shelf of old Blackwell photographs, not touching the files, not opening drawers, not invading the past. She was carefully setting upright a fallen frame of Thomas Blackwell, Adrian's father. Beside it, she had placed one white flower from the estate garden. Adrian stopped in the doorway, the old anger rising fast because grief, when unguarded, often disguised itself as fury. "What are you doing in here?" Emily turned, startled but not afraid. Margaret said the door was open. "I saw the frame had fallen. This room is private. I understand. I did not read anything." His voice hardened. "You expect me to believe that?" She looked at the photograph, then back at him. "No, I expect you to believe whatever hurts you least." The sentence silenced him. Emily walked toward the door, leaving the room exactly as she had found it except for the frame now standing straight. As she passed him, she said quietly, "Respect is not the same as strategy, Adrian." He remained in the doorway after she left, staring at his father's face and the single white flower beside it. For the first time, the revenge he had built so carefully felt less like justice and more like a locked house into which he had invited the one person who kept opening windows. By the second week of the contract marriage, Adrian Blackwell had begun to understand that Emily Hartman did not enter rooms the way other people did. She did not ask what something cost before deciding whether it mattered. She did not treat staff like furniture that had learned to answer questions. She did not perform sorrow when cameras were near or kindness when powerful people watched. She noticed small things, and small things Adrian was learning were dangerous because they slipped past defenses built for grand betrayals. On Monday, she discovered that the East Hall radiator had been making Margaret's arthritis worse during early morning rounds, so she asked Ben to adjust the heating schedule and offered to take tea upstairs herself. On Tuesday, she found Claire's son sitting in the kitchen after school while his mother finished late laundry. And by dinner the boy had 3 old space books from Emily's suitcase and a paper rocket taped to the pantry wall. On Wednesday, she sent a handwritten thank you card to St. Mary's after the hospital confirmed staff hours were protected. As if gratitude should travel both directions, even when she was the one who had signed away a year of her life. Adrian watched all of it from doorways, stair landings, and the far end of long tables, feeling the revenge inside him grow restless. It was easier to hate the daughter of Richard Hartman when she remained an idea, a name, a signature, a bridge to a trust. It was harder when she stood in his kitchen at midnight, wearing a sweater too soft for the cold house, making soup for Margaret because the older woman's cough had returned. "You know Margaret has health coverage," Adrian said from the doorway. Emily did not turn around. "Health coverage does not bring soup upstairs. Staff can help staff. People can help people." He stepped into the kitchen, irritated by how simple she made goodness sound. "Do you ever stop?" She looked at him then, wooden spoon in hand, hair loosely pinned, eyes tired but clear. "Stop what? This?" He gestured vaguely toward the soup, the folded napkin, the small tray she had prepared with honey and lemon. "Trying to make everyone believe you are incapable of selfishness." The words were colder than he intended, but once released, they stood between them. Emily placed the spoon on the counter. "You think kindness is a costume. I think Hartmans are trained to survive by making themselves useful." Her face changed, not dramatically, not with tears, but with the quiet hurt of someone who had been reduced to a surname one too many times. "And I think Blackwells are trained to call suspicion wisdom because pain taught them the wrong language." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Careful." "No," she said softly. "I have been careful since the day I signed your contract. Careful with your house. Careful with your grief. Careful with the fact that you married me to punish a man I did not become. But I will not be careful enough to let you insult every decent thing I do just because revenge has made decency look suspicious to you. The kitchen went silent except for the low sound of rain against the windows. Adrian should have answered. He was excellent at answers. But Emily picked up the tray, walked past him, and left him standing beside the stove with nothing but the smell of chicken broth and the uncomfortable knowledge that she had not raised her voice once. The next morning, Daniel, the driver, arrived late. Adrian noticed because he noticed everything that affected schedule, image, and control. Daniel's eyes were red, and his tie was knotted badly. Before Adrian could ask, Emily appeared at the side entrance with a paper bag from a pharmacy and a folder tucked under her arm. "Daniel, wait," she said. Daniel stopped immediately, looking embarrassed. "Mrs. Blackwell, you did not have to." "I know. That is why it matters." She handed him the bag. "The prescription is covered through Friday, and the clinic confirmed the specialist appointment." Daniel looked down, swallowing hard. "My daughter will be so grateful." Adrian stepped forward. "Your daughter?" Daniel turned pale, as if personal trouble were a professional failure. "She has a heart condition, sir. Nothing urgent today, but the new medication was delayed by insurance review." Adrian looked at Emily. "Why was I not told?" Daniel opened his mouth, but Emily answered first. "Because people who work in houses like this learn to keep private fear quiet." "That does not answer my question." "No," she said. "It answers the one you should have asked." Adrian looked at the pharmacy bag, the folder, Daniel's lowered eyes. "How was it paid?" Emily's hand moved slightly toward her wrist, and only then did Adrian notice what was missing. The thin gold bracelet from her mother was gone. The one she had placed beside her mother's photograph every night. The one she touched when she thought no one was watching. His voice dropped. "Where is your bracelet?" Daniel looked between them in horror. "Mrs. Blackwell, no, you said it was from a small account." Emily kept her eyes on Adrian. "Daniel, please take the medicine home." The driver left reluctantly, the door closing behind him with a softness that made the silence louder. Adrian stared at her bare wrist. "You sold it." "I used it." "That was your mother's." "Yes. For my driver's medical bill." Her eyes sharpened. "For his daughter. You should have come to me. So you could make generosity feel like permission? So I could pay it." "You could have," she said. "And maybe you still should. But at the time, there was a child who needed medication and a father too afraid of losing his job to ask the billionaire in the house for help." Adrian's anger rose because it had nowhere honest to go. "Do you want me to believe this is who you are?" Emily looked at him for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was low enough to make him listen. "You think kindness is a strategy because revenge has been yours for too long." The sentence struck him harder than accusation would have. She turned to leave, but he caught the edge of the folder on the table and saw the receipt from a small jewelry buyer in White Plains. The bracelet had not been worth much by Blackwell standards. That made it worse. To him, it would have been pocket change. To Emily, it had been memory. By evening, Adrian had bought the bracelet back. He did not tell her. He placed the small velvet pouch in the top drawer of his desk and sat before it for nearly an hour, unable to decide whether returning it would be kindness or another way of making himself feel less guilty. Celeste called after dinner. "Richard is coming tomorrow night. The transfer documents are ready. If Emily sits beside you, he will feel secure enough to sign." Adrian looked toward the east hall, where Emily's door was closed and a thin line of warm light showed beneath it. "Do not use her name like that." Celeste paused. "Like what?" "Like furniture in a negotiation." Her voice cooled. "Adrian, she is the mechanism. Do not become sentimental because she feeds servants and sells trinkets." His hand closed around the phone. "Call it a trinket again and this conversation ends. Permanently." Silence. Then Celeste said carefully, "Tomorrow is the point of all this. Do not forget your father." Adrian looked at the framed photograph on his desk. Thomas Blackwell standing proud before the fall, unaware that revenge would one day make his son's heart resemble a locked room. "I have not forgotten," Adrian said. But after he ended the call, he opened the drawer, took out Emily's bracelet, and realized the problem was no longer whether he remembered his father. The problem was that Emily Hartman kept making him remember himself before revenge taught him who to become. The dinner Adrian Blackwell had planned as the cleanest strike against Richard Hartman began with candlelight, polished silver, and a table long enough to hide every ugly intention beneath expensive manners. Blackwell Mansion looked warmer than usual that evening because Margaret had insisted on amber lamps instead of the cold overhead lights, and Rosa had filled the dining room with roasted chicken, winter vegetables, fresh bread, and the kind of calm domestic sense that made revenge feel almost indecent. Emily stood near the doorway in a dark green dress, her hair pinned low, her bare wrist hidden beneath one hand. She did not know that the bracelet her mother had left her rested inside Adrian's locked desk upstairs. She did not know that he had almost returned it twice, then stopped because guilt, when dressed as generosity, still looked too much like control. She only knew Richard Hartman was coming to dinner, and every time her father entered a room, the air seemed to prepare itself for a lie. Adrian came down the staircase in a black suit, expression unreadable. Celeste Monroe beside him with a slim leather folder in her hand. Emily saw the folder and felt something cold move through her. Contracts had become weather in this house. They appeared before storms. "You look prepared," she said to Adrian quietly. He glanced at Celeste, then back at Emily. "It is a business dinner. Nothing about my father is just business." Celeste smiled. "Then you understand why structure is necessary." Emily looked at her. "Structure is what people call a trap when they do not want to admit they built one." Adrian's eyes shifted toward her, but the sound of cars on the gravel drive cut off whatever he might have said. Richard Hartman entered the mansion 10 minutes later as if he still owned every room he stepped into. He wore a navy tuxedo, a gold watch, and the bright public smile that had carried him through charity galas, board scandals, and family breakfasts where everyone knew not to ask direct questions. He kissed Emily's cheek without warmth. "My daughter," he said, just loud enough for the room to hear. "Mrs. Blackwell now, finally useful in the right circles." Emily did not flinch, but Adrian did. A small movement, almost nothing. His hand closed once at his side. Richard turned to him with open charm. Adrian, my boy, your father would have appreciated this table. The room seemed to harden around the name. Emily looked at Adrian, but his face had gone still in the way frozen lakes looked safe before cracking. Do not speak of my father as if you honored him, Adrian said. Richard gave a wounded laugh. Still carrying old stories? Business is not personal unless a man lacks discipline. Celeste guided everyone toward the table before the sentence could become something sharper. Dinner began with controlled conversation. Market conditions, trust structures, hospital funding, employee retention. Richard complimented the wine, ignored Rosa when she served him, and spoke of St. Mary's as if the children's wing were a line item he had misplaced rather than a promise he had broken. Emily sat beside Adrian, close enough to feel the tension in him, far enough to understand she had not been invited as a wife. She was scenery, a signal to Richard that the trap was safe. Celeste waited until the plates were cleared before sliding the folder toward Richard. The transition documents are straightforward, she said. A voting rights adjustment, temporary oversight language, and a transfer recognition tied to the marital provision. Richard skimmed the first page, then looked at Adrian with a smile that did not reach his eyes. You always were ambitious. Adrian leaned back. I learned from men who took what was not theirs. Careful, Richard said softly. You married into my family. Emily felt that sentence pass over her like cold water. My family, my asset, my useful daughter. Richard picked up the pen but did not sign. Instead, he looked toward Emily. You understand this is why decent families arrange marriages carefully. Feelings are decorative. Utility lasts. Emily's fingers tightened around her napkin. Adrian's voice dropped. Leave her out of this. Richard laughed lightly. Why? She is the only reason this table exists. He turned toward Emily. Do not look so tragic. St. Mary's gets its little wing. Blackwell gets his revenge fantasy. I keep enough dignity to avoid a public mess. Everyone receives what they need. The children needed what you promised them months ago, Emily said, and they have it now because you signed where you were told. The words landed with a quiet cruelty that made even Celeste look down for a second. At that moment, a young server named Claire entered with coffee. Her hands were steady, but Richard shifted his chair without looking and made her stop awkwardly beside him. Not there, he said. Do try to notice where people of consequence are sitting. Claire's cheeks flushed. Emily moved before Adrian did, rising from her chair. She noticed perfectly. You changed position. Richard looked amused. Sit down, Emily. No, the room went still. Emily took the coffee pot gently from Claire and set it on the sideboard. No one at this table is made more important by making someone else feel small. Richard's smile thinned. You have always had your mother's softness. It was useless in her too. Adrian's eyes lifted. Emily went pale, but her voice remained clear. My mother's softness is the only reason any decent memory still lives in the Hartman name. Richard's hand struck the table, not violently enough to harm, but hard enough to rattle the silverware and reveal the man beneath the polish. Your mother knew nothing about power. Emily stood straighter. If your power only survives by hurting people who cannot fight back, then you were never powerful. Silence filled the dining room, deep and absolute. Adrian looked at her as if the room had tilted and placed the truth exactly where revenge had been sitting. This was Richard Hartman, not the entire Hartman family, not Emily, not the woman who had sold a bracelet for a driver's daughter, not the wife who gave soup without asking for gratitude. The guilty man was at the table, smiling with other people's pain on his mouth. Celeste broke the silence first. Richard, sign the documents. Richard looked at Emily with open contempt, then picked up the pen. Gladly. Perhaps my daughter's moral performance can be added to the entertainment budget. Adrian's hand covered the contract before Richard could sign. Everyone froze. Celeste's eyes sharpened. Adrian. He did not look at her. He looked at Emily, at her bare wrist, at the quiet fire in her face, and for the first time since his father's fall, revenge did not feel like justice. It felt like another man using a woman at a table. Not tonight, Adrian said. Richard stared. Excuse me? Adrian closed the folder. The documents can wait. Celeste's voice went cold. That is unwise. Emily looked at Adrian, unable to read him. Richard stood, furious beneath his expensive calm. You think you can summon me here and delay? Adrian rose too, but his voice stayed low. I think I can decide what kind of man I am before signing my name to anything else. Richard left the dining room with a promise that delay would cost them all. Celeste followed him into the hall, already speaking in urgent whispers. Emily remained by the table, one hand on the back of Claire's chair. Adrian looked at her, and the apology almost came. But before he could speak, Margaret appeared at the doorway holding a small envelope addressed in faded handwriting. Mrs. Blackwell, she said softly. This was delivered with the old Hartman files. It has your mother's name on it. Emily took the envelope, turned it over, and saw the words written across the front. For Emily, if Richard ever rewrites the truth. Emily carried the envelope to the East Library as if it might break if the house breathed too loudly. Behind her, the dining room still held the remains of a dinner that had nearly become a battlefield of signatures. Folded napkins, cooling coffee, untouched, dessert, and the closed folder Celeste had wanted Richard to sign before Conscience entered the room. Adrian followed several steps behind, not because he had been invited, but because something in Margaret's face had told him the envelope belonged to more than Emily's grief. The handwriting on the front was delicate and slanted, faded by time but unmistakably personal. For Emily, if Richard ever rewrites the truth. Emily stood beneath the warm library lamp and touched the letters with one finger. It is my mother's handwriting, she said. Adrian did not speak. He knew better than to make this moment about his questions before she had survived her own. Emily opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a folded letter, 3 photocopied documents, and a small photograph of her mother, Lillian Hartman, standing at a charity luncheon beside Thomas Blackwell years ago. In the photo, Lillian was younger than Emily remembered her. Gentle-faced, anxious around the eyes, holding a folder against her chest as if truth had weight. Emily unfolded the letter first. Her mother's voice seemed to rise from the page, soft but urgent, crossing years of silence in one breath. My dearest Emily, if you are reading this, then your father has done what I feared he would do. He has made himself the victim of a story he helped create. I tried to stop him. I tried to warn Thomas Blackwell before the final vote. Richard said it was only business, only leverage, only a temporary correction that would be fixed after the merger. But I saw the side agreement. I saw the altered amendment. I knew a good man was about to lose what he built. Emily's hand tightened on the page. Adrian turned away for a moment, but not before she saw his face change. The room had taken him back to 17, to a sidewalk outside a building that still carried his father's name and no longer belonged to him. Emily kept reading, though every sentence made her feel as if the floor beneath the Hartman name was cracking open. I sent a warning packet through legal channels because I was afraid Richard would intercept anything sent directly. The packet was addressed to Thomas Blackwell and marked urgent. Contained copies of the amendment, the side letter, and my statement. I later learned it never reached him. Richard told me I was hysterical. Celeste Monroe, who handled transaction communications at the time, told me the issue had been resolved and that pressing further would destroy our family. I was weak, Emily. I let fear and illness and shame silence me longer than I should have. But silence is not innocence. If this letter finds you, give the truth to whoever needs it most, even if it hurts the Hartman name. Especially then. Emily lowered the paper. The library clock ticked once. Then again, as if the house itself were waiting to see which family would bleed next. Adrian's voice was almost unrecognizable. Celeste had this. Emily looked at the copied delivery receipt. There it was, dated 18 years earlier, marked received by Monroe Legal Review, with Celeste Monroe's signature at the bottom, younger, sharper, undeniable. The second document was Lillian's statement. The third was the merger amendment with Richard's notes in the margin, proving he knew exactly how the voting rights shift would strip Thomas Blackwell of control. Adrian reached for the document, then stopped himself. May I? He asked. The question was small, but Emily heard what it cost him. Permission, from the daughter of the man he hated, to touch the truth about his father. She handed it to him. He read in silence. His face did not collapse. Men like Adrian did not collapse easily. But something in him loosened and fell inward. The anger he had carried for years had always had one clear direction. Richard Hartman, the Hartman family, the name Emily wore by birth and now by accusation. This letter split the name in two. Richard had betrayed. Lillian had tried to warn. Emily had signed to save children, not to hide him. Adrian sat down slowly, the documents in his hands. My father died believing no one tried. Emily's eyes filled, but she did not let the tears fall. My mother died believing she failed because she was afraid. Richard knew. Yes. Celeste knew. Yes. The word was quiet, but it changed the house. Adrian looked toward the hallway where Celeste had followed Richard into. Whispered strategy minutes earlier. She helped me build a revenge plan against the one Hartman who would have given me the truth. Emily folded her mother's letter against her chest. She helped you use me because it protected what she buried. Adrian stood, anger returning now but different. Cleaner. Not the blind cold thing that had married Emily as a weapon. This anger had names, documents, direction. He reached for his phone. I am calling a board session. Adrian. He stopped. Emily's voice trembled now, not with fear, but with the force of choosing against her own blood. Use it. He looked at her. Emily, this will expose your father. It should. It will damage the Hartman name publicly. The name was damaged when he hurt people and taught everyone else to call it business. She stepped closer and placed the letter on the desk between them. Truth should not belong only to the people it benefits. Adrian stared at her, and for the first time since the wedding, he looked less like a man trying to win and more like a man realizing the price of victory had been miscalculated from the start. You would give me this, he said, knowing what it does to your family. Emily's voice softened. My mother gave it to me because she wanted the truth to outlive fear. I will not bury her courage just because my father buried his conscience. The door opened before Adrian could answer. Celeste stood in the threshold, her face composed, but her eyes dropped immediately to the documents on the desk. For one breath, no one moved. Then Adrian lifted the delivery receipt with her signature and said, very quietly, how long did you know? Celeste's expression hardened. You need to think strategically. Emily looked at her mother's letter, then at the woman who had helped turn grief into a contract. Adrian stepped between Celeste and the desk, but he did not hide Emily behind him. He stood beside her. No, he said, for the first time in years, I am going to think honestly. Celeste's calm cracked. If you bring that into the shareholder room, you lose control of the narrative. Adrian looked at Emily, at the woman who had just handed him the power to destroy her father and the chance to stop destroying her. Then I will lose the narrative, he said, and tell the truth. The shareholder room at Blackwell Tower was built for victories men could frame. 42 floors above Manhattan, glass walls looked out over a city that seemed small from that height, and the long black table reflected every face seated around it with the cold honesty of polished stone. Board members arrived in dark suits and careful silence. Legal counsel opened laptops. Advisors whispered over folders. Richard Hartman sat near the center with the confidence of a man who still believed charm could outrun evidence. Celeste Monroe stood behind Adrian's chair, expression calm, tablet in hand, every inch the loyal attorney who had shaped the revenge plan and now intended to control its ending. Emily stood near the back wall in a simple ivory dress, her mother's letter folded inside her clutch, her bare wrist hidden beneath her other hand. Adrian had asked if she wanted to stay home. She had answered, no, my mother's truth should not enter that room without me. So she came, not as a wife performing loyalty, not as a Hartman seeking mercy, but as the only person in the room who had already paid for both names. Adrian entered last. He wore a charcoal suit. No smile, no theatrical anger. only a stillness that made Celeste's eyes narrow. On the table before him lay 3 folders. Richard's transfer documents, Lillian Hartman's warning packet, and the contract marriage agreement that had started as a weapon in his hands. Celeste leaned close before he Saturday, stick to the acquisition structure. Expose Richard, secure the voting rights, and leave Emily out of the statement. Sympathy makes boards nervous. Adrian did not look at her. So does fraud. Her mouth tightened. Do not confuse justice with confession. He finally turned. That is exactly what I have been doing. The meeting began with formal language, minutes, quorum, transaction review. A senior board member asked Adrian to summarize the Hartman Trust adjustment. Richard leaned back, fingers folded over his stomach, pretending patience. I think we all understand why we are here, Richard said. Smoothly. Old grievances, new opportunities. 2 families finally making peace through business. Emily felt the word peace burn. Adrian stood. The room quieted. We are not here to make peace through business, he said. We are here because 18 years ago, Richard Hartman used a merger amendment and an undisclosed side agreement to strip Thomas Blackwell of controlling rights in the company he built. Richard's smile thinned. That accusation has been romanticized by your family for years. Adrian opened the first folder. Then let us remove romance. Documents appeared on the screen. The altered amendment, Richard's handwritten margin notes, the voting rights shift, Lillian Hartman's statement. Board members leaned forward. Richard's face remained composed until the delivery receipt appeared, dated and signed. Celeste Monroe. A murmur moved through the room. Celeste stepped forward. That receipt has no bearing on the validity of the current transaction. Adrian looked at her. It has bearing on you. Her eyes went cold. Adrian continued, voice even. Lillian Hartman attempted to warn my father before the final vote. She sent a packet through legal review because she feared Richard would intercept direct communication. That packet was received by Celeste Monroe and never reached Thomas Blackwell. Richard turned toward Celeste with the first honest shock Emily had ever seen on his face. It lasted only a second before calculation returned. Lillian was unwell, he said. She misunderstood business pressure. Emily stepped forward before anyone could stop her. My mother understood exactly what you were doing. She was afraid of you, but she was not confused. The room turned toward her. Adrian did not interrupt. He did not speak for her. He stood beside the table and let her voice own the space. Richard's eyes sharpened. Emily, sit down. She looked at him, and years of being used as his quiet daughter ended in that single stare. No, Celeste tried to regain control. This is becoming personal. Adrian's voice cut in. It was personal when I married Emily Hartman to punish her father. The room went silent so fast the air seemed to stop moving. Emily closed her eyes for 1 second, not because she was surprised, but because hearing the truth in public hurt differently than knowing it alone. Adrian picked up the contract marriage agreement and placed it on the table where everyone could see it. I entered a contract marriage with Emily to gain leverage over the Hartman Trust and force Richard into exposure. I told myself it was justice. It was not. It was revenge dressed as strategy. Celeste whispered, Adrian. He ignored her. Emily signed because the contract funded St. Mary's Children's Wing, protected staff hours, and prevented innocent employees from sudden collapse. I used that kindness as leverage. She used the same marriage to protect people I had never bothered to see. He turned toward the board. I married her to punish a name. She used that marriage to protect people. Richard stood abruptly. This is absurd. My daughter is not innocent in this arrangement. Adrian's expression hardened. Do not place your guilt on her because she carries your last name. He clicked to the next document. Emily's added conditions, the hospital funding clause, staff retention protection, no publicity involving children. Emily negotiated protections for children, hospital workers, and employees before she protected herself. Lillian Hartman tried to warn my father. They are not collateral damage. They are evidence that guilt is not inherited. The sentence moved through the room like a door opening. Emily looked at him then, not with forgiveness, but with something more painful. Recognition that he finally understood the truth she had been living. Celeste set her tablet down. If you proceed this way, you weaken your claim. Adrian looked at her. Then I weaken it honestly. The board chair turned to legal counsel. Open an independent review into the original merger, the Hartman Trust transfers, and Ms. Monroe's handling of the warning packet. Celeste's face emptied of color. Richard began speaking quickly, invoking privilege, memory, misunderstanding, anything that sounded expensive enough to distract from the facts. But the room had shifted. For once, the men who had always listened to power were listening to proof. Adrian closed the folder. Blackwell Holdings will pursue recovery from Richard Hartman through lawful channels. Emily Hartman Blackwell is not a target of this action. Neither was her mother. I will not restore my father's name by destroying the women who tried to do what the guilty men would not. Emily's breath trembled. The public justice she had feared became something cleaner than punishment. Richard exposed. Celeste named. Thomas Blackwell's warning restored. Lillian's courage no longer buried. Then Adrian turned toward her, and the room seemed to disappear around the distance between them. Emily, he said, voice lower now. I am sorry. I made you a clause in my revenge when you should have been a person I protected from it. The apology reached her, but it did not undo the wedding suite, the cold mansion rules, the contract on black leather, or the nights she had wondered whether kindness could survive inside a house built for punishment. She walked to the table, removed the wedding ring that had always felt more like evidence than promise, and placed it on top of the contract. Then do not ask me to remain inside it, she said. Adrian's face changed, but he did not stop her. That was the first mercy he gave without turning it into control. Emily walked out of the shareholder room with her mother's letter in her hand, leaving behind the ring, the contract, the Hartman lie, and the billionaire husband who had finally won his revenge only to understand that the woman who ruined it was the only part of the story worth saving. Emily left Blackwell Tower without looking back, not because leaving was easy, but because staying would have taught her heart the wrong lesson. Manhattan moved around her in cold afternoon light, taxis rushing past the glass entrance, office workers crossing the sidewalk with coffee cups and phones. The world continuing as if a woman had not just placed a wedding ring on top of a contract and walked away from a billionaire who finally understood her too late. She went first to St. Mary's Children's Wing, still wearing the ivory dress from the shareholder room, her mother's letter folded carefully inside her clutch. The hospital lobby looked exactly as it had before the wedding. Faded cloud murals, plastic chairs, the fish tank with 2 sleepy goldfish, the vending machine that still took quarters only when it felt generous. But something had changed. Nurse Angela met her near the playroom with tears in her eyes and a stack of new staffing schedules in her hand. The funding cleared, Angela said. All of it. Staff hours, family housing support, medication assistance, the playroom program. Everything. Emily nodded, but the relief did not lift her completely. It only settled beside the grief. Children were safe. Families were protected. Her mother's truth had reached the room where it belonged. Richard Hartman's lies were no longer treated as business. Celeste Monroe's buried signature was under formal review. Thomas Blackwell's name would be restored through documents, not rumors. Justice had begun. Yet when Emily looked down at her bare hand, she felt the empty place where the ring had been and new freedom could still ache. For the next 3 weeks, she did not return to Blackwell Mansion. She stayed in a small apartment lent by a hospital board member near Yorkville, where the radiator hissed at night and the kitchen table became her place for answering hospital emails, sorting volunteer schedules, and reading her mother's letter until she could hear courage more clearly than regret. Adrian did not send flowers. He did not send a driver. He did not ask Margaret to call. He sent legal documents first. The contract marriage agreement formally terminated, with no penalty, no settlement condition, no performance clause, no public appearance requirement. Attached was a handwritten note. You were never mine to hold by paper. I am sorry I needed losing you to understand that. Emily placed the note in a drawer and cried only after closing it. The next day, St. Mary's received confirmation of an independent endowment in the Children's Wing's name, governed by a separate board, protected from Blackwell, Hartman, or any single donor's control. No photographs. No press release centered on Adrian. No naming ceremony. Just money moved cleanly where it had always been needed. Then, quietly, Daniel's daughter's medical bills were covered through a staff emergency fund Adrian created for every employee at the estate. Margaret received paid medical leave she had never asked for. Claire's son got a library card from a community program Blackwell Holdings now funded without banners. Adrian was learning, Emily saw, not to give grandly where everyone could applaud, but to repair specifically where people had been afraid to ask. Still, repair was not the same as love. And love, if it ever returned, would have to come without a contract in its hand. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Emily was in the St. Mary's playroom arranging donated books when the elevator doors opened and Adrian Blackwell stepped out carrying 3 cardboard boxes. He was not wearing a perfect black suit. He wore a dark sweater, a wool coat damp at the shoulders, and no visible security team. His hair was slightly wind-touched. His face had lost the hard shine of conquest. In the boxes were picture books, art supplies, puzzles, and a stack of space books for Claire's son, who had apparently told him dinosaurs were good but rockets were better. Emily stood still near the playroom shelf. Nurse Angela looked between them and suddenly remembered an urgent task somewhere else. Adrian did not move closer. I asked before coming, he said. Angela said the playroom needed books. The playroom needed books before you felt guilty. I know. That answer stopped her more than any defense would have. He set the boxes gently on the floor. From inside his coat, he took a cream envelope and placed it on the table between them. Emily recognized the black leather contract seal, but this time it was broken. Inside were the original agreement pages, torn cleanly in half, alongside the gold bracelet her mother had left her, restored and resting in a small cloth pouch. Emily's breath caught despite herself. Adrian's voice was quiet. I bought it back before the shareholder meeting. I kept it because I did not know how to return it without making my guilt another burden for you to carry. That was wrong too. She touched the pouch but did not pick it up yet. You tore the contract. Yes, that does. Not erase it. No, it only ends my right to hide behind it. A child laughed in the hallway. Rain tapped lightly against the windows. The hospital smelled like crayons, clean sheets, and cafeteria soup. Adrian looked around the room, at the small chairs, the worn rugs, the shelves Emily had been trying to fill, and his face softened with a sadness that had finally learned humility. I do not want a wife by contract, he said. I want the chance to earn a place beside the woman who ruined my revenge by being kinder than my pain. Emily closed her eyes for 1 second. The words hurt because part of her wanted to believe them. Another part remembered the wedding suite, the folder, the cold rules of the mansion, the way he had looked at her name and seen a path to Richard before he saw a person. When she opened her eyes, Adrian was still waiting. Not reaching, not claiming, waiting. That mattered. I am not ready to forgive you, she said. I know. I may never be the wife you imagined after all this. The wife I imagined was written by revenge. I am not asking for her. Emily looked at the boxes on the floor, then at the children's table where half the book still needed labels. Slowly, she picked up one box and handed it to him. Then start by helping. Adrian took it as if she had given him something far more valuable than permission to carry books. For the next hour, he sat on a tiny blue chair, writing labels while a little boy explained that dragons and dinosaurs were not the same thing, and Emily tried not to smile when Adrian listened with absolute seriousness. No cameras came. No board members applauded. No contract demanded that she stand beside him. But when the rain softened outside and the playroom shelves filled one book at a time, Emily felt the smallest possible beginning take shape. Not forgiveness. Not yet, but freedom with room for truth. Adrian looked up from the last label, waiting for her direction, and Emily realized that love could never grow inside a contract built for revenge. It could only begin here, in a room full of children, torn paper, returned memory, and a man finally learning that the first step toward being chosen was no longer trying to own the choice,